possess this map, but I make it a point. It shall be kept a secret even from me and Mr. Arrow, otherwise I would ask you to let me resign." "I see," said the doctor. "You wish us to keep this matter dark, and to make a garrison of the stern part of the ship, manned with my friend's own people, and provided with all the arms and powder on board. In other words, you fear a mutiny." "Sir," said Captain Smollett, with no intention to take offence, "I deny your right to put words into my mouth. No captain, sir, would be justified in going to sea at all if he had ground enough to say that. As for Mr. Arrow, I believe him thoroughly honest. Some of the men are the same, all may be for what I know, but I am responsible for the ship's safety and the life of every man Jack aboard of her. I see things going, as I think, not quite right, and I ask you to take certain precautions, or let me resign my berth, and that's all." "Captain Smollett," began the doctor with a smile, "did you ever hear the fable of the mountain and the mouse? You'll excuse me, I dare say, but you remind me of that fable. When you came in here, I'll stake my wig you meant more than this." "Doctor," said the captain, "you are smart. When I came in here I meant to get discharged. I had no thought that Mr. Trelawney would hear a word." "No more I would," cried the squire. "Had Livesey not been here, I should have seen you to the deuce. As it is, I have heard you. I will do all you desire, but I think the worse of you." "That's as you please, sir," said the captain. "You'll find I do my duty." And with that he took his leave. "Trelawney," said the doctor, "contrary to all my notions, I believe you have managed to get 2 honest men on board with you, that man and John Silver." "Silver, if you like," cried the squire, "but as for that intolerable humbug, I declare I think his conduct unmanly, unsailorly, and downright un-English." "Well," says the doctor, "we shall see." When we came on deck, the men had begun already to take out the arms and powder, yo-hoing at their work, while the captain and Mr. Arrow stood by, superintending. The new arrangement was quite to my liking. The whole schooner had been overhauled, 6 berths had been made astern out of what had been the after part of the main hold, and this set of cabins was only joined to the galley and forecastle by a sparred passage on the port side. It had been originally meant that the captain, Mr. Arrow, Hunter, Joyce, the doctor, and the squire were to occupy these 6 berths. Now, Redruth and I were to get 2 of them, and Mr. Arrow and the captain were to sleep on deck in the companion, which had been enlarged on each side, till you might almost have called it a roundhouse. Very low it was still, of course, but there was room to swing 2 hammocks, and even the mate seemed pleased with the arrangement. Even he, perhaps, had been doubtful as to the crew, but that is only guess, for, as you shall hear, we had not long the benefit of his opinion. We were all hard at work, changing the powder and the berths, when the last man or 2, and Long John along with them, came off in a shore boat. The cook came up the side like a monkey for cleverness, and as soon as he saw what was doing, "So ho, mates," says he, "what's this?" "We're a changing of the powder, Jack," answers one. "Why, by the powers," cried Long John, "if we do, we'll miss the morning tide." "My orders," said the captain shortly. "You may go below, my man. Hans will want supper." "Aye, aye, sir," answered the cook, and touching his forelock, he disappeared at once in the direction of his galley. "That's a good man, captain," said the doctor. "Very likely, sir," replied Captain Smollett. "Easy with that, men, easy." He ran on to the fellows who were shifting the Soon it was hanging, dripping at the bows. Soon the sails began to draw, and the land and shipping to flit by on either side, and before I could lie down to snatch an hour of slumber, the Hispaniola had begun her voyage to the Isle of Treasure. I am not going to relate that voyage in detail. It was fairly prosperous. The ship proved to be a good ship, the crew were capable seamen, and the captain thoroughly understood his business. But before we came the length of Treasure Island, 2 or 3 things had happened which require to be known. Mr. Arrow, first of all, turned out even worse than the captain had feared. He had no command among the men, and people did what they pleased with him. But that was by no means the worst of it, for after a day or 2 at sea, he began to appear on deck with hazy eye, red cheeks, stuttering tongue, and other marks of drunkenness. Time after time he was ordered below in disgrace. Sometimes he fell and cut himself. Sometimes he lay all day long in his little bunk at one side of the companion. Sometimes, for a day or 2, he would be almost sober and attend to his work, at least passably. In the meantime, we could never make out where he got the drink. That was the ship's mystery. Watch him as we pleased, we could do nothing to solve it, and when we asked him to his face, he would only laugh. If he were drunk, and if he were sober, deny solemnly that he ever tasted anything but water. He was not only useless as an officer and a bad influence amongst the men, but it was plain that at this rate he must soon kill himself outright, so nobody was much surprised nor very sorry when one dark night with a head sea he disappeared entirely and was seen no more. "Overboard," said the captain. "Well, gentlemen, that saves the trouble of putting him in irons." But there we were, without a mate, and it was necessary, of course, to advance one of the men. The boatswain, Job Anderson, was the likeliest man aboard, and though he kept his old title, he served in a way as mate. Mr. Trelawney had followed the sea, and his knowledge made him very useful, for he often took a watch himself in easy weather, and the coxswain, Israel Hands, was a careful, wily, old, experienced seaman who could be trusted at a pinch with almost anything. He was a great confidant of Long John Silver, and so the mention of his name leads me on to speak of our ship's cook, Barbecue, as the men called him. Aboard ship he carried his crutch by a lanyard round his neck, to have both hands as free as possible. It was something to see him wedge the foot of the crutch against a bulkhead, and propped against it, yielding to every movement of the ship, get on with his cooking like someone safe ashore. Still more strange was it to see him in the heaviest of weather across the deck. He had a line or 2 rigged up to help him across the wider spaces. Long John's earrings they were called, and he would hand himself from one place to another, success to our voyage, wasn't you, Captain? And the parrot would say with great rapidity, pieces of 8, pieces of 8, pieces of 8, till you wondered that it was not out of breath, or till John threw his handkerchief over the cage. Now that bird, he would say, is maybe 200 years old. Hawkins, they lives for ever mostly, and if anybody's seen more wickedness, it must be the devil himself. She sailed with England, the great Captain England, the pirate. She's been at Madagascar, and at Malamore, and Suriname, and Providence, and Portobello. She was the fishing up of the wrecked plate ships. It's there she learned pieces of 8, and little wonder, 350,000 of 'em, Hawkins. She was at the boarding of the Viceroy of the Indies, out of Goa, she was, and to look at her you would think she was a babby. But you smelt powder, didn't you, Cap'n? Stand by to go about, the parrot would scream. Ah, she's a handsome craft, she is, the cook would say, and give her sugar from his pocket, and then the bird would peck at the bars and swear straight on, passing belief for wickedness. There, John would add, you can't touch pitch and not be mocked, lad. Here's this poor old innocent bird of mine, swearing blue fire, and none the wiser you may lay to that. She would swear the same in a manner of speaking before Chaplin, and John would touch his forelock with a solemn way he had that made me think he was the best of men. In the meantime, Squire and Captain Smollett were still on pretty distant terms with one another. The Squire made no bones about the matter. He despised the Captain. The Captain, on his part, never spoke, but when he was spoken to, and then sharp and short and dry and not a word wasted. He owned, when driven into a corner, that he seemed to have been wrong about the crew, that some of them were as brisk as he wanted to see, and all had behaved fairly well. As for the ship, he had taken a downright fancy to her. She'll lie a point nearer the wind than a man has a right to expect of his own married wife, sir. But, he would add, all I say is we're not home again, and I don't like the cruise. The Squire at this would turn away and march up and down the deck, chin in air. A trifle more of that man, he would say, and I should explode. We had some heavy weather, which only proved the qualities of the Hispaniola. Every man on board seemed well content, and they must have been hard to please if they had been otherwise, for it is my belief that there was never a ship's company so spoiled since Noah put to sea. Double grog was going on the least excuse. There was duff on odd days, as for instance, if the Squire heard it was any man's birthday, and always a barrel of apples standing broached in the waist for anyone to help himself that had a fancy. Never knew good come of it yet, the Captain said to Dr. Livesey. Spoil forecastle hands, make devils, that's my belief. But good did come of the apple barrel, as you will hear, for it had not been for that, we should have had no note of warning, and might all have perished by the hand of treachery. This was how it came about. We had run up the trades to get the wind off the island we were after. I am not allowed to be more plain, and now we were running down for it with a bright lookout day and night. It was about the last day of our outward voyage, by the largest computation. Sometime that night, or at latest before noon of the morning, we should sight the treasure island. We were heading south-southwest, and at a steady breeze, abeam and a quiet sea. The Hispaniola rolled steadily, dipping her bowsprit now and then with a whiff of spray. All was drawing low and aloft. Every one was in the bravest spirits, because we were now so near sat down with rather a clash close by. The barrel shook as he leaned his shoulders against it, and I was just about to jump up when the man began to speak. It was Silver's voice, and before I had heard a dozen words, I was not have shown myself for all the world, but lay there, trembling and listening, in the extreme of fear and curiosity. For from these dozen words I understood that the lives of all the honest men aboard depended on me alone. Next time